I suppose the most interesting and becoming more and more interesting is non-state. I mean, under the terms of the various Vienna Conventions of the 1960s, the state is identified as the only one that can accredit official diplomats. So now if we're looking at that sort of non-state-centric diplomacy, business diplomacy perhaps is an interesting area, which is not perhaps as new as we might think. I mean, if you go back to the 1700s and the East India Company and these sorts of things, the Hudson Bay Company, clearly they were involved in non-standard, non-state-centric diplomacy and interaction, and even signing of treaties as well. So non-governmental and non-state-centric bodies involved in diplomacy I think is of more and more interest. I suppose the UN climate change conferences and I was about to say jamborees, I don't want that to necessarily sound negative, but where you're having states, international organizations, pressure groups. The Arctic Council might be another one where indigenous peoples are also involved in the negotiations as well. This is clearly an area that is expanding, that was quite difficult to identify, let's say 40, 50 years ago, but is becoming increasingly important.
Well, I think I see it everywhere, which is why I like studying it. My specific sort of case studies have been both of what we might think of as conventional diplomacy, state-to-state, foreign ministry type, Ferrero Rocher candies and red carpets. But equally, I like to look for diplomacy in areas where we don't traditionally describe it as diplomacy. So intelligence cooperation, military relations, the enmeshing of computer networks and databases. I think of those as diplomatic, equally, as ambassadors shaking hands and doing that kind of thing. We have this term protocol in traditional diplomacy, which is the sort of rituals and performance of getting, how you interact, a very rigid set of rules in which kind of ambassadors and heads of state meet. And it's interesting to look at all the other places where you see the term protocol pop up. So for instance, in internet networking, where again, a protocol is what enables computers to link up. And so I think we can think very broadly about the ways in which things come to be connected together and transformed in that process.
I think that it tends to work much better if the person who's involved in the diplomatic practice is representing a consortium or is representing a multilateral organization, for instance. I very much admire what Lakhdar Brahimi is now doing, for instance, on behalf of the United Nations, even though it has not been very successful at all. But the efforts he made in Afghanistan, the efforts he made in Syria, could not have even been made by somebody like John Kerry, for instance, the American Secretary of State, whom I do admire. I think that his patience is profound, and he's certainly much smarter than most American politicians. But Brahimi is able to go in there with all kinds of bona fides, which somebody representing a great power can't. So I myself prefer to work with either multilateral groupings or with people who've got experience of multilateral groupings.